Um, oh yeah. So welcome everyone. I'm Don Burton and I'm filling in for Darda Sales, who is busy at the moment during a classification event out in Saskatoon. So there's a Ontario provincial camp that went out there. And, there's a bunch of athletes that are going through lots of different tests today. And so Darda's obviously with them and busy. But we have Mike Thompson today on the call, and I'm going to throw a whole bunch of questions at him. Normally Mike is the one asking questions. He used to do like this podcast on a pretty regular basis, and he was asking questions on all the time, and he
nice change
a long time ago. So now it's payback, Mike. All right. So Mike, can you just, I'm sure everybody knows, but where are you currently right now? What are you doing right now? And where did you start your coaching career way before that? And we seem to be frozen.
I can go through all of my name is Mike Thompson, for anyone who doesn't know me or hasn't met me. I'm the currently the head coach of the High Performance Training Center in Montreal that deals specifically with para-athletes. And currently in Montreal awaiting a COVID test result so I can go back to work. And until I have that, I'm unfortunately off. So it's kind of nice to have some company today instead of just staring at a TV. But Don, just to give you guys some background on me, my career started, I've been coaching for 25 years. I didn't know that. That's new to me because I think some of my coaching years go beyond the point where I was still an athlete and coaching on the side. So when I swam for Wilfrid Laurier University under Dean Bowles. And when I was done, I coached with Dean for about a year until I realized that coaching was not paying my bills. And I had a whole student loan to pay back. So I had to get a 9-to-5 job in an office. So I started working in offices, and I just generally was not happy working in an office. I'd jump from job to job, and I'd last 1 year here, take another 1.5 years there, 2 years here, kind of thing. And I just felt that nothing I was doing was giving back to the community, and it certainly wasn't giving back to me. So I started looking around for opportunities to coach, or just opportunities generally just give back into my community. So I reached out to the Special Olympics, and the problem was my schedule was too up and down for them, and they couldn't take me in because I wasn't able to commit to a regular basis. So I kept looking, and I found a club that I had never heard of at the time, the Halton Hills Bluefins, who Rob Masson was the head coach at that time, and he remembered me from swimming, and it was really happy to take me in. So I started as an assistant coach, working a full-time job, being an assistant coach on the side, spending all of my holiday time basically going to meets. And that worked out really well for a little while. And then I changed my career a little bit to try to get closer to home. So I was literally working in an office across the street from Halton Hills Pool, which was very convenient until the economy tanked and it was a transportation company. So I went to the owner of the company and told him that, obviously I have another job, and I was in my, I think, late 20s, early 30s at that time. So I was much more marketable than, a 60-year-old person that he was going to have to lay off. So I asked him very politely, very nicely, if he could lay me off, I think I'll be okay. So he spared that salary, gave me about a month's salary to find another job. And I went to the club I was working for at the time. At that time, I was the head coach, and said, I can't guarantee I can stay here unless you guys are going to pay me a full-time salary, because I may have to go work downtown and I may not be able to come back in time to make the workouts work. So to Halton Hills' credit, they did a great job of trying to figure out the finances to hire me on full-time. So I got on full-time there, and I was there for, I think, 8 years, and then moved on to work with Oakville and Roe, Wilfrid Laurier University, and then ended up out here as the head coach of the High Performance Training Center. Do you want more specifics on that, Don, or does that kind of fill in the background?
No, that's good. I think it's I think a lot of people, when they get into the coaching the sport of swimming, didn't necessarily think that they were going to be doing what they're doing.
If I were to flash forward 30 years and take a look at this, I would not believe where I am or how I got here or why I got here.
Yeah, and I think everyone that is a coach in the sport of swimming, came at it from a couple of different avenues, and whether they tripped, fell, or got pushed into coaching, they are where they are. No, so that's really, really good. And I think it's really interesting that being at a small club for a little while is really, really helpful, and being at a couple of different clubs, having the opportunity to learn how those organizations had, their plans and their how they formatted everything and communicated with the membership, all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is really helpful to then, borrow and use, for the stuff that's then applicable to your next gig. So my next question is, what coaching education programs or modules have you taken? And of those, like, which ones did you find really, really helpful? Because some of the stuff, to be somewhat honest, you have to take, and you will learn stuff along the way, even if you are reluctant to take it. And you maybe even go into it, begrudgingly or whatever, but there are other things that are really, really helpful. So
I would like to be asked back, so I'm going to choose my words very carefully. I have a notorious history with the NCCP. So I went through I've been through levels 1 and 2, and I did the pilot project at the time for Comp Dev, which was level 3, which I had a very hard time with, simply because the administration and the planning wasn't awesome. So in that period of time, when I wasn't really sure how to get more experience, and Don, you were quite prevalent in this, was that I just decided that I was going to start hanging out with more accomplished coaches than me, and I was going to start doing more apprentice work than actual coursework. So I remember the first one I jumped on was going down to Indianapolis with you guys. I think you had Andrew Ford with you and Shantique and a few other people. That was an eye-opening experience for me, simply because I had never seen that sort of speed in person before. So I'm a huge nerd, and I'll watch every race that I can find online, but I'd never seen it in person. And that was a really eye-opening thing for me, not only to see that stuff in person, but to be around those people and to understand how they're warming up for events, what they're doing between, what they're actually like. And then hanging out with you guys and seeing what kind of stresses you have as high performance coaches, working with those high performers that were, I think that was 2012, before trials. And I think we were looking for some people to make the 2012 team at that point. So it was really, really good for me to do those things. I think beyond that, I did one with Ben Titley out to California for a few weeks. We did a competition and a training camp. I volunteered to basically everything I could. I started doing podcasts. That you mentioned that before, Don. I started doing a podcast series where basically I was just sitting down with coaches and asking the burning questions that I wanted to know. But I also realized that other people probably also wanted to know. And at that time, Zoom wasn't a thing really. So you couldn't record your conversations. I had to figure out how to record and edit and all that sort of stuff just to bring that information out. So I think, I've been through basically every single NCCP thing that's been available to me. And they're varying values. I think that level 3 was helpful for me because it really looked at the entire season as opposed to just what you're going to do with one athlete at a championship meet or whatever. But I think even beyond that, just volunteering to do apprentice things and being able to get outside of your 4 walls and see what people are doing, outside of in the world, I think has been really helpful. And further to that, I just think any of the opportunities that I've been able to do on any national team have been really helpful. Thinking back very recently on my first experience at the Paralympics in 2016, I didn't know anybody. I was there and basically hanging out with the coaching staff that we had because I didn't know a single person. And I was very shy. The second year that we did the second year that I was on the head coach here, and we did world championships that didn't actually happen. That's when things started to open up for me because I started having to ask other coaches, what are you guys thinking about? There was, for those who don't remember, there was a big earthquake in Mexico City at the time. That's when their world championships were supposed to be in October. They were postponed to December, but because of the funding, it costs $200,000 to bring a group of athletes out to altitude to prepare for the altitude in Mexico City. We had already spent our money and we couldn't afford to go. So basically we didn't. But it was the prep for that meet that didn't happen and the recovery afterwards that really forced me to reach out to German coaches, Dutch coaches, Irish coaches, English coaches, people from all over the world, it's Australian coaches, people from all over the world, just to figure out how they were coping with this and what they were going to do past that. And then once those relationships built, we have a WhatsApp group with about 20 coaches from around the world right now where we shoot messages back and forth, trying to give heads up on information or best training practices or preparation stuff. So I really think practical experience is the best thing if you can get it. The problem is that not everyone's available for that. If you're a teacher and you can't leave your job because you obviously reasons you have to be at school, it's gonna be really tough for you to get some professional development practical. So really it's going to be whatever you can do. I think the NCCP program is great. It's a certification program. It's not necessarily an education program from my perspective. I think the educational pieces are, go take a coach out for lunch and ask them all the questions you want. I think that's the best education best education advice I could offer you anyway.
Great answer. And I couldn't agree more. Okay, so how did you get involved with coaching para athletes? When did you have any interaction with any para athletes at Halton Hills or Oakville, or was it at Laurier and Rowe? And
It
like,
was actually my first experience was working with Adam Purdy at Rowe and Wilfrid Laurier University. He joined our group, I think the second last year I was coaching, and then he was there while I was coaching. And I think that's what really opened my eyes. Like I was completely ignorant to it. I didn't at that time really understand the difference between the Special Olympics and the Paralympics. And the main difference there is performance. The Paralympics are high performance athletes that are looking for the best possible performances. The Special Olympics is more of a participatory event. So Adam explained that to me. And the more I worked with Adam, the more I kind of liked the fact that this is the exact same thing. We're just trying to figure out how to get to the other end of the pool with this set of restrictions. So that was great. And then when I got to Halton Hills, we often had youngsters come in with small impairments that didn't know anything about paraswimming. In fact, I coached a girl all the way up to her victory lap of grade 12. And it was that victory lap that she was classified as a paraswimmer because we didn't think she was until we got to a certain point where we realized that actually she fell inside the parameters. So a little bit of experience at Halton Hills, but basically all it was for me was getting people in the pool and allowing them to be part of the club. So it wasn't, one of the most common things that I think is frustrating for everybody is that if you have an athlete that is 18 years old, but at the same speed as an 11-year-old, chances are those people are probably going to train with the 11-year-olds because of the same size and the same speed. The problem with that is an 18-year-old has next to nothing in common with an 11-year-old. So what do you do to make that a pleasurable experience? All I saw was that, and tried to figure out how to incorporate those athletes into my senior program so they could train with their peers, train with their friends, and really feel like they're a valued member of the club instead of just, we're letting you in, but you're a pain in the butt. I really didn't want that to happen. So that's what we tried to do in Halton Hills. Didn't really have very many para athletes in Oakville at all in that club. And then when I moved to Rowe, we had quite a few. And again, the challenge was how do we get these guys into the senior group instead of having a special para group that takes care of their stuff. So that's really all it was for me. It was trying to engage with those athletes and trying to get them involved and make them enjoy their experience inside swimming, because if they leave negatively, that nobody wins, right? Swimming doesn't win, they don't win. We just try to get them involved. And then that year at Rowe, I had Alec Elliott as an athlete who was on the national team, and I was selected to go to World Championships and Para Pan Ams, which was obviously a huge experience for me. And this job opened up, and with those two bits of crucial experience, I think that kind of pushed me over the edge to be able to get this job. So that's kind of my experience. It's more around trying to accommodate them and trying to get them into a program so they can actually enjoy swimming. I think that's the piece that gets missed. So they're not just part of your club. They're not just someone who's paying a fee they're paying a fee and they're getting something in return. You really want to make sure that they enjoy their process and they enjoy the sport and they leave with nothing but great things to say, because if they leave negatively, like I couldn't get into the pool or they weren't treating me right or something like that, nobody wins from that. All right. Everybody's got to have a positive experience in the sport.
Yeah, great answer. I couldn't agree with you more. And you led very well into the next question, which is, what areas of knowledge do you think that coaches working with para athletes need to develop?
Great question. And the easiest possible answer I can give everybody is get your hands on a copy of the WPS rule book and read the rules. That is the big limiting factor that I'm seeing constantly throughout the sport, not just in Canada, I think about everywhere. The rules are the FINA rules. They're just amended to different things. So there are certain things that certain athletes can get away with because let's say you only have one hand, you can't possibly touch simultaneously with two hands because you only have one hand. Let's say you don't have legs, you can't possibly do a breaststroke kick because you don't have legs. So there are exceptions there. And I think it's really important to read the book to understand what it is that they need to know. Because that's, I could list the number of things here, but it's very simple. Get a copy of the rule book online. It's very, very easy to find. Just go to the WPA or the World Paraswimming website and it's available there. Download a PDF copy, read it from cover to cover. I don't think you need to know it by heart, but I think understanding what the rules are, I think is really important. Another thing that I'm finding is people, for whatever reason, they skim through meat packages and they skim through selection criteria. And you can't skim through that stuff. You really have to read and understand, how does my athlete make a team? And maybe the third thing that I think people are missing that knowledge of is I think people are still seeing this as it was back in the 90s, where a lot of large countries like China, Japan, Korea, a lot of countries that weren't participating necessarily are putting their best foot into para are now. So in the 90s, possibly early 2000s, when Canada did the best job that we've ever done before, we had a really high market share of the athletes in the world, whatever percentage were Canadian. Now, not necessarily the case. We have countries like Russia and China and Ukraine that have really been successful just by putting their hat in the ring. So it's not nearly as easy as it was to make a team. It's not nearly as easy as it was to break a record, and it's not nearly as easy as it was to medal when it matters at a World Championships or Paralympic Games. So I think those are the main things that people need to know. Everything else, there's nothing really specific about paraswimming that's different than regular swimming. And I don't even like calling it regular. Excuse me, I don't like calling it regular swimming. I call it the Olympic side. It's really not that much different. The goal is still to make it to the other end of the pool as fast as you can. You're just given a different set of tools to do it. So understanding that, and then the other things that are on top of that are the things that the 1-2% things. Understanding what the impairment the athlete actually has is, and reaching out for help if you don't understand some things. I'm actually very encouraged that this last year, especially from Ontario specifically, I've had about 7 coaches contact me just to ask the question around Can-Ams, ask the questions around Commonwealth selection and World Championship selection. So I'm really encouraged by that, because that's been a while since people have really reached out and been interested. I'm hoping that this resurgence after COVID is giving us a little bit more spirit around, like, I can help these guys. I want to do something. What do I do? So yeah, I think that the biggest things: download the rule book, learn the rule book, learn to read meat packages and selection criterias, and just understand that there's really nothing that much different about swimming. Figure out what those athletes can do, and don't be afraid to push them in a direction, because they're athletes. They're not soft.
Skimming meat packages is a thing that all coaches, when they're behind the 8 ball and they're running out of time, they just skim it. And I think we've all done it, where we just skimmed it and then we didn't realize until after the fact, or in the moment, wow, I missed something. So
yeah, I'm guilty of that as well.
Yeah. So that's easy enough to do, but and especially if you've been somewhere, it's like the 13th time you've been there to the same place or whatever, like it's worth doing, especially for any kind of provincial or Swimming Canada events like that. You really need to take the time. It's worth the 5 minutes to solve the problem later on.
But it's what we said before we went live, Dom. The two of us were talking about Don's in a master's degree thing, and I'm trying to get through the advanced coaching diploma piece. And a lot of it comes down to time. I mean, I'm responsible for 13 athletes. I'm responsible for the 13 full-time athletes. I'm responsible for 8 IST members that are employees of mine that I need to make sure we get together and meet. I'm available for everybody, no matter when they meet, or when they need me, I should say. We've just hired an assistant, Jean-Michel Lavalier, who's an amazing athlete and a very good coach. But from July, August till now, I've been doing this alone. And I'm guilty of it as well. I have very, very precious little time, and it's very hard to get through a course, let alone, add something else on top of that to learn. So I'm very empathetic to that. I get it. But when you take a look at your season plan and you're talking to an athlete and you want to give them any hope at all, it's really important to know whether or not it's likely that it's possible for them to even make it to trials, let alone making it somewhere past that. So it's really important to know the context and the frame of where your athlete is at. And the only way you can possibly know that is by understanding the rules, being able to read a meat package, and being able to read the selection criteria, because otherwise you're feeding them false hope, which is a really bad thing down the road.
Good point. Earlier on, you talked about how when you had to get some information from some of the international coaches, you just kind of went out of your comfort zone and started talking to them and asking them questions of whatever you needed. There isn't, whether it's Olympic side or para side, there really isn't a pipeline to go to find out the information you need. It really is about, you need to just get on the phone or get on an email and send a message to somebody and be brave enough to ask the question to go, okay, look, I have no idea how to solve this problem or address this issue. Like, can you help me? Will you help me? And not be scared to follow up, because I don't know, sometimes the person that you left a message for, whether it's email or a phone call, they got busy. Like, it's not because they didn't like you, they just got busy. And if you need it, figure it out. Like, we keep telling our swimmers to do that. If you really want it, you're gonna find a way to make it happen. the coaches.
To your credit, Don, you've done that quite a few times to me. You've reached out and asked questions about people you've been working with and how best to situate that. So credit to you. I mean, it's a hard thing to do. It's your ego often gets, not you specifically, Don, but one's ego can get in the way of actually progressing and getting better sometimes because they're afraid to admit that they don't know something.
Yeah, fair enough. What do you find is the biggest difference or the differences between coaching para athletes and the Olympic side?
I haven't done high performance on the Olympic side, so it's hard to tell. The closest I've been to that environment, I think, is Commonwealth Games, where we're working as a team of coaches together to figure out the best dynamics for our Team Canada. It's just from my experience working with age group athletes and with athletes that are like kind of there but not quite there. I think the biggest difference to me is that paraswimming is a little bit more fun. And I say that because there's a lot more thought involved and there's a lot more creativity involved. As far as the athletes themselves, I don't find that much of a difference. I mean, athletes are athletes, people are people. And I think that's the myth that I just want to maybe spend a couple seconds here dispelling, is that these, my athletes that I work with, they're not para swimmers, they're high performance athletes. And they happen to be para swimmers. So that's not really how we label ourselves. We label ourselves as high performance athletes. And in that regard, there really isn't that much different. I've been around Ben's program, and I've been around the Vancouver Center program a little bit, and there's really not that much difference. I mean, the high performance practices that we put into place, we use the same practitioners through the COPSI network, and we use the same practitioners through Swimming Canada. So the lines that we sell are pretty common, pretty similar. I would say maybe that the big difference that I haven't mentioned yet is that the pathway is quite different for an Olympic athlete than it is for a Paralympic athlete. I've said before that it's very unlikely for someone like Ryan Cochran to come out of nowhere. No one's going to go to a meet and all of a sudden Ryan Cochran wins medals. Everyone's kind of known who Ryan Cochran was as he came through the ranks. I mean, he may have been impressive as he was going, but people knew who he was going into the Olympics. He didn't come out of nowhere and medal. Because of the classification system, and people can be late entries into the sport, you may be first in the world going into world championships, and there may have been 3 new classifications this year that are just faster than you because they're faster swimmers before they got classified. So I guess that's a little bit different, that a lot of the times you can't rely on the world ranking. You have to really push yourself to be the best that you can be, not the best in the rankings, because the rankings can change overnight. And as I said, it's not unlikely that someone, people have heard of Mary Sophie Harvey. She's been around for a long time. It's not like she came out of nowhere in the ISL and did something special. That's much more likely in the para side than it is in the Olympic side. I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head, or actually I can, I just don't know his name. But there was an athlete from Israel that really cleaned up at the games, and we have never heard of him before, never seen him before. So again, people can come out of nowhere, which makes it kind of exciting and creative. And you got to really coach athletes to be the best that they can be, not the best that the ranking says they should be.
Awesome. What's your biggest challenge in working with para athletes? Which is somewhat unique in the fact that before you took the job that you're in now, you were working with the Olympic side and the para side. Now you're exclusively working with para inside, a structure inside of Swimming Canada, all that kind of stuff. So some of that stuff is different structurally, but I think the question is really more about, it's a non-specific question. It could be from a structural side or.
I guess the biggest challenge would be that pathway. I think that, for an athlete that maybe has been swimming for I'm not using anyone specific here. I'm just thinking off the top of my head and using round numbers. If there's an athlete that's been swimming for 2 years, for example, in the para system, and they really haven't swam that much before, it's much more likely that person, and because there aren't really a guiding developing pathway, and I know that Janet Dunn is working on a better pathway than what we have. But currently, basically, it was going from provincials to trials, and then the only thing higher than you could go to on trials was basically an international team. And can you imagine someone who's been swimming for 4 years going from, provincials to the Paralympics? And it's a very, very difficult transition to make. I can't imagine. Well, I guess there was somebody this summer on the Olympic team that had only been in the sport for a number of years that ended up making the team. But I think it's a little bit more frequent on the Paralympic side than it is on the Olympic side. And I think the tough thing now Easterns is a very good upscale meet that we can kind of make that into the progression. But before, again, it was provincials and nationals, and there really wasn't anything in between. So I guess that's the challenge, is that, people have really, really early success quick. And then we have to make sure that they stay around and don't get bored, or like the highlight of their life wasn't when they were 16 and they're always looking back on that. We want to make sure that there is a pathway in place and we're not specializing people too early. And we're actually sticking to a long-term athlete development plan. Just because someone's 19 doesn't necessarily mean that their swimming age is 19. Their swimming age may only be about 4. So that's the thing. I guess that's the most challenging thing, is helping people understand that just because they've been here and they've done some things doesn't mean they're going to continue at that improvement rate. That's a tough conversation to have with a lot of people, but it certainly exists.
It's not an easy conversation to have with anybody, that's for sure. How has working with para athletes impacted you as a coach?
I'm not sure I have an answer to that. I don't know if para swimming specifically has impacted me as a coach. I think it's given me opportunities that have impacted me as a coach. I think one of the most life-changing, if not career-changing things I've done has been in the Canada Coach Program with On the Podium. I had a really bad case of imposter syndrome before I started that program, and helping me realize that I'm better than I gave myself credit for, but also increasing my communication ability, increasing my emotional intelligence, my ability to actually admit that I'm wrong sometimes, and my ability to, be humble and be probably a lot more empathetic to those athletes. I think that's what's changed the most, but I'm not sure that those are para traits. I think I was working in a job that allowed me those opportunities. I'm not really sure that para coaching has changed my coaching very much. I know that I'm a lot more comfortable around impairments, like before, where I wasn't quite sure where I should look or if I should shake hands, or I'm a lot more comfortable with that now. So maybe that's changed. But I think that I've changed much more from a high performance standpoint than I have from a coaching para standpoint. I stand by the fact that I really don't think it's a special thing. It's a different thing, but it's not a special thing that really creates that much of a difference, I don't think, in my coaching.
Okay. So now you're in Montreal, or you have been there for a while. The facility you're in is the Olympic pool from '76. Yep. So you're in pretty much an amazing facility with lots and lots of different support people and a network to help make stuff, to make the performance happen, or the opportunities for the performance to happen. And we just finished an somewhat extended cycle, Olympic cycle. So can you talk a little bit about the athletes that you have? And you don't need to be specific about the people and their names, but if you said you have 13 people in the group, how many of those people are new? How many of those people are returning athletes? And how many of those people were in 2016 to 2021?
Sure. When we started this program, we started in an Olympic year. So we started 2015, 2016, which is a really awkward time to ask people to change coaches. So Tom Rushton had a similar group on the Olympic side at that time. And our thought process was it was going to be almost impossible to get anyone to switch clubs or switch coaches. So I was basically going to be an assistant coach for Tom for the first year, and then do camps and outreaches. But Benoit Huot decided that was something that he wanted to latch onto, and he was going to take a risk. And I thank God every day that he did, because, man, he gave us a lot more cred than we could have possibly gotten on our own. So he came over in that 2015, 2016 year and brought 2 extra athletes. And then we had some outreach athletes that we were working with part-time. And when the games were over, that was it. Everyone parted ways and we started again. So we brought in 4 athletes that ended up being our core. That's Tess Routliff, Zach Zona, Danielle Kisser, and James LaRue. Those are the key 4 that have kind of been through from 2016 to 2021. And we've had a supporting cast of people kind of rotate in and out around them, trying to find the right fits. We have had people that we've had to ask leave because they weren't working out very well. And we've had other people that I would have loved to hold on to, but either they lost karting or they couldn't afford to be in Montreal anymore and had to move away. So that's kind of heartbreaking, is that, you try to set a system that's going to be the same people all the way through 4 years, but, through numerous things, we didn't have the same team going through. So the time we hit 2018, I think we had 9 people. We had Benoit Huot come back and Aurélie Rivard join us. So that kind of increased the number in the group. And then Ben retired and Orly left for Quebec City. So that brought us back down. And but anyway, before we hit COVID, I think we had 12 people in the group. And then once we hit COVID, that got a little bit complicated. We had some part-time kids that we were going to bring in as after the 2020 games in September of 2020. But we figured since we have an extra year, we might as well bring them in the September of 2020 anyway. So we started last year with 5 next-gen athletes and 8, if my math is right, 8 returning athletes that have kind of been around for a while. And then yeah, obviously no trials, no meets last year. And so some people were excluded from the selection of the games, which is obviously very hard. And then from my perspective as a coach, obviously it's not their fault and it's not my fault. It's no one's fault. But obviously some concerned conversations, which resulted in some retirements. And we had another athlete, Danielle Doris, who was working with us part-time last year, in for a little bit, out for a little bit, and really more or less supporting her and her coach, Ryan Allen, out in Moncton. And she's moved in this year, as well as 2 other athletes. I brought one in for a relay initiative and another one because there was really nowhere left to go with her program. And she was, I think, ready to move into a high performance environment. So long way to answer your question. 2 of those athletes are new this year. Danielle Doris is here full-time. She's a gold medalist from the summer and world record holder. She's in full-time now. We have our returning 4, obviously, and then a supporting cast of the newer athletes that we brought in 2020. So we kind of have 3 different levels in the group, but trying to operate them as if they're one group working together towards that goal of everyone making the world's team this year. We have a strong range too. We have everything all the way up to S13 or S14, sorry, going down the line down to S5. So there are days where I'm writing 7 different practices for one practice, because not everyone can do the same thing, and people have specializations of when their schedule is in, when they're out. So there's a very it takes a lot of organization. It takes a lot of focus to try to make sure that everyone gets what they need here. But yeah, only 2 of them are new.
Okay, cool.
Long way to answer that question.
No, that's a great answer. So this one is a solid question. So you have to be ready to put on your pontificating hat.
Right.
Where do you see parasumming and coaching going in the next 5 to 10 years? And we're just going to talk about in Canada first, and then we can talk about internationally.
Swimming Canada's put a lot of money into it and has recognized that, it is, well, I mean, they've always recognized that it's a legitimate sport. I don't want to say that they or imply that they ever thought it was illegitimate. But I think John Atkinson and Wayne Lomas do see the value in what it can bring Canada in terms of inspiration. So a lot of money has been put into that. In the next 10 years in Canada, I can't even tell you what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks in Canada, to be honest. But if I'm looking out, I would think there's a much better pathway for those athletes to progress, so we don't end up in the problem I just talked about, where your swimming age is 2, but all of a sudden you're on the Paralympic team, because that's probably not the best way to progress. But also looking for more meets that are milestones along the way, that it's not that I'm qualifying for provincials and then I'm reaching to qualify for trials. Maybe I'm reaching to qualify for Easterns, and then past Easterns, I'm trying to reach for something similar to maybe to OJI or something like that. Just a better pathway that allow athletes to say, how do I get to the Paralympics, instead of I just have to register and then I can go to the Paralympics. Helping athletes understand what that pathway is to get forward. And then I would really like to see a coaching pathway. I would like to see that encompassed in the NCCP program, where it's not a para module. It's more or less, this is how to coach athletes, and if they happen to be para, here's something we can do. I just like that to be talked about more, because I think that it's out of sight, out of mind. If someone hasn't done it before, it's a daunting experience that they're worried about and they don't want to get involved. So that's what I'd like to see in Canada in the next 10 years, is just more inclusion in that lines. On the Podium is actually doing some great things right now to kind of enhance or encourage that involvement. So I really do see some positive things happening in Canada in the next 5 to 10 years. I just couldn't tell you what they are or when they're going to happen, unfortunately, right now. If you're looking at in the world, I don't want to say I'm less optimistic, but World Paraswimming has kind of backed themselves into a corner with classification opportunities, with COVID being down and them sticking to their rules of when people have to be reviewed and classified. So I really don't know what to expect with that. I know that they're looking for new governance. I know that they're looking to change some things. They recognize that they have a bit of a problem, so they are working on getting that. but I couldn't tell you what that's going to look like in 5 or 10 years. That could look like ideally if FINA absorbed them and everything worked congruently with a FINA schedule. I would love that. I'm not thinking that's going to happen though. But that's what I'd like to see in the world in the next little bit, is just some regulation around how they're doing things and why they're doing them, and get caught back up on classification, because that's really going to be the piece that's going to stall them out in the future. If we can't get new people in the sport, if everyone retires, we're going to be in a big bind.
Absolutely. So I have a question for you. You sort of answered the last question that was on this list that I was given with your last answer. So I get to the opportunity to work with some para athletes, and I find that you had mentioned that, you know, if you have seven different athletes there and they all have different classifications, then you sometimes are writing up 7 different workouts, which makes sense to me. But you can make a workout up for any athlete, and they can show up that day and they go, like, you know, I've got a kink in my neck, my back is sore, my shoulders hurt, or I can't move this limb, like, or just, you know, like, there are, how flexible are you at on your planning, and then how, you know, obviously you have to get the group going forward, and you can look after any individual's needs in the moment as long as the rest of the group is rolling along. But like, how quickly do you change what you're doing? Do you try to stay true to what your original plan was? And has that changed at all in your time of coaching in Montreal with exclusively para athletes?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Working with Benoit and one of the other athletes, they basically did what a regular club athlete would do. So that wasn't different for me at all. The tougher thing was working actually with my new assistant coach, Jean-Michel. It was tough because he was one of the people that, again, would show up and left arm's just not working today. Left leg's just not working today. I can't push hard. I can't, you know, my resting heart rate is way too high. And I think that's where my expertise kind of ran out. I didn't have the experience with that. So what we started doing was working more with a physiologist to figure out what actually was happening to his body. And it actually, they made me shift my attitude towards, are we able to work hard enough, to are we actually recovering enough so that we can work hard enough? And I think that was a big paradigm shift for me, because ordinarily it was just how hard are we working and whether or not we're getting the right work in. Whereas now it was, how are we going to work hard, but then encourage enough recovery that we can come back and work hard again. And that was, like I said, it was a big paradigm shift for me, especially with him specifically. So armed with that experience, we brought in some other athletes that had varying degrees of impairments. We had short of stature, we had missing limbs, we had CP, drop foot. We had tons of things that we just had to consider what was happening. So I think I had to be really, really flexible with that, because there are people that just, they don't recover as fast as other people. But also relying on our doctor, our physiologist, and our physiotherapist to make sure that if those people can't do something one day, they're still doing some mode of practice. It may not be water practice. It may be, we're going to stand on deck and do, you know, whatever it happens to be to get that arm moving. Or it may be, you know, I'm not going to come to workout today. I'm going to go to massage therapy or physiotherapy instead, because that's when I need more. And then we have people that react really, really well to dry land training as well. So there are some people that don't necessarily swim as much as I would have in the past thought they should have, but they are still getting some of the stuff done on land that's not necessarily quantifiable as distance. So I guess that's maybe another thing that you know, I had to change was my reliance on how much distance we were doing, because distance can be done in a number of different ways. What we started doing was using heart rate monitors inside the training sessions, all training sessions, so that we know whether or not the intention of that practice was reached. So if that was supposed to be an easy recovery workout, are they actually keeping their heart rate in a zone where they are recovering, or are they working a little bit too hard so they're not fully recovered by the time they come back? And then we added on top of that a layer of heart rate variability. So when they wake up, we know how their body is responding to the rest that they just got. So if they wake up and they're still exhausted, and someone with CP is very easy to work into a hole where they can't get out of because they're too exhausted, it was pretty easy to say, okay, well, this person's definitely not ready to train today. So we're going to change up their schedule. They're going to have them come in. They're going to do something with the physiotherapist. They're going to see the doctor, and then they're probably going to do some dry land stuff instead of getting in the water today. So yeah, I think that, I think I remember your question now that I've kind of gone down this hole. Yeah, I think I have to be extremely adaptive, because, you know, there are a number of things that can happen. I have an athlete with with epilepsy that has seizures from time to time. So that's one thing, we have to watch them in the water to make sure they don't have a drop seizure in the water. But at the same time, we have to monitor them to find out what causes these, what's more likely, what are the exercises and things that happen around them when they tend to have these seizures, and can we maybe stay on a program that's going to stop them from happening. And if it does happen, how can we adapt so that swimmer doesn't lose 3 days of training when it happens? So yeah, I think we have to be extremely adaptable, but it's not just me being adaptable. Sometimes a lot of the times I'm relying on our physiotherapist, doctor, and physiologist just to tell me whether or not we're moving in the right direction. I think I have a pretty good understanding of physiology, but I certainly don't have the mastery of it as our physiologist does. So I really do rely on my experts to help me with that stuff.
And obviously a great communication with your athlete is the kind of foundation of that. They need to actually be honest with you and tell you how they're doing. Like sometimes it's not going to be visual, that you can actually see that they're how today is different than it was yesterday. They just need to be able to like actually tell you, hey, you know what, like I'm not feeling like it. I felt great yesterday. Today I don't feel very good at all. Like,
well, I call the heart rate monitors and the heart rate variability stuff, I call them the lie detectors, because a lot of the athletes don't want to admit that they're not strong or that they're not ready to go. So I call those the lie detectors. So we'll be able to tell whether or not they're telling me the truth, or maybe and sometimes maybe they do feel fine. They feel okay until they get about 20 minutes into a practice. And then they start to get pretty exhausted. Their heart rate shoots through the roof and they can't breathe. So those are the things that we just try to control, like the communication with the athletes from my part. And I try to remind them about once, twice a week that, maybe I'm not like other coaches you've worked with. And I just keep trying to throw that out there so they kind of maybe sink that into their brain, that this isn't quite like your club program where you're coming in and grinding every day. We're going to have you swim fast and swim well when it's time to swim fast and well. So if it's not that time today, you're not going to move backwards because we're still doing something. I think that's the thing that we have to try to help them understand, because they're not really sure whether or not that's the right way to go. It's counterintuitive to everything they've done before. So it's a new thing for them a lot of the times.
Cool. Excellent answers. That exhausts my list of questions for you. Does anyone on the call here have any questions for Mike?
Feel free to unmute yourself, guys, if you want to ask in person. I don't mind at all. Nothing?
As usual on a Zoom call, nothing but crickets.
Well, listen, if anyone does have any questions and either you don't want to ask or you can't think of them yet and something occurs to you later, feel free to shoot me an email, mthompson@swimming.ca. And usually I'm pretty good with email. I can get back to you in a couple of hours. But if anything occurs to you and you want to ask a question, please send me an email, mthompson@swimming.ca.
Well, thank you, Mike. This has been awesome. I enjoyed it. It's good to see you. Good to talk to you. So
yeah, good to see you too, man. I haven't seen since COVID. I haven't seen you in quite a while.
That's great. That's right.
There will be a reunion one day, I'm sure.
All right. Well, thank you. If there's no questions, then thanks everybody for joining in, and have a great day.
Yeah, you too, Glenn. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.